All right, hello everyone. I would like to present to you, well, I don't know really what to call it, a framework, a library, let's call it a piece of technology, a cool piece of technology that we have been using in Issuu for many years now, and it's kind of a secret to how we build our infrastructure internally. But before I'll go to that, I will maybe mention what Issuu is, because many of you are probably familiar with the company, but it is an online platform for digital publishing. You can sort of think of it as a YouTube for digital publications. It's all kinds of things. People can upload whatever they want. It's free to upload, but there's also premium features. You can upload your things. You can share them on social media. You can measure how people are engaging with your content, and you can also monetize it via our platform. We have a whole range of things. There's thousands of people uploading things every day in all kinds of brands. You can probably find something that you will find interesting there right now. But the interesting part is, of course, that we are pretty big. There's about 100 million unique visitors every month. We have about 5 billion monthly page views. There's over 2 million people who upload content to Issuu, and they do that by uploading about 20,000 documents every day. And we have way over 20 million total documents stored on Issuu. So in order to get all of this to work, and in order to, we're a small company. We are about 20 people in engineering. So in order to get this thing to work and allow us for fast development, we had to create this little piece of technology. So the title talks about the thin layer. That's a little misleading, maybe, because we just decided to change the name. I thought we're gonna release something and it needs a nice hipster name rather than something boring like thin layer. So I'd like to introduce you to Broen. So what this is really is we took something we call internally the thin layer, and we took the generic part that anybody could use, and it doesn't really have anything specific to us, and we have decided to share it with the community and see what you guys would like to what you guys think about it, and if you want, just use it and see what happens. So those of you who are from Sweden maybe will appreciate this. So what Broen really is an HTTP to AMQP bridge. So what it really does is it takes HTTP requests and then transforms them to AMQP messages. And that kind of shifts all the burden of things like routing, load balancing, and all kinds of these onto the RabbitMQ broker, which we're using. It also is able to authenticate the requests, and we have some customization available via different plugins that I'm going to talk about in a moment. So why would we do this? That's a question that some people ask when I say something about it. Well, first of all, it makes it very simple to do routing, because that's just RabbitMQ. Anybody who's done any work with AMQP knows that it's actually super simple to set up a queue, bind it with some certain routing key, and just go to town with it. We get load balancing provided to us by AMQP, and it allows us to just swap things in and out. So if we have a service that is providing some HTTP endpoints, we can just shut it down, replace it with another one. We can put in a new one within seconds and have new HTTP routes available very easily, very quickly. What it also does, it is provides us a single point of authentication, so all the services that are behind it, behind the bridge, they don't need to care about authenticating requests, because the Broen will do it and kind of give this information. Is this request authenticated, and which user data is accessible, and things like that. So it provides you with these two endpoint routes, which you can build URLs on top of, and the idea is that you can use some of them for public endpoints, and then if you have internal only endpoints for like administration tools or whatever, then you have another route just to split up this configuration if you want. Authentication is fully customizable. The one we use internally is not the one we released. We only released, I'll show you what we were giving you as a sample. The idea is that it's up to you. You decide how you want to authenticate your users. You know what you need to do there. The same with the serialization protocol for the messages being sent over MQP. That is fully custom. You can pick and choose whatever you want. It's using Folsom to collect metrics. If you don't know what Folsom is, it's a Erlang library that collects all kinds of metrics and then stores them in ETS tables. And then you can use some other application to take them out of Folsom and ship them, for example, to Graphite or something like that. And then it also has like support for multipart, so you could actually upload files through Broen to your microservice behind it. So it works more or less like this. A client will make an HTTP call to Broen. which will then run this request through the authentication module to determine whether the user there's there any credentials for that user or not, or is that an anonymous request. Currently what we do is that if authentication fails for whatever reason, the request still proceeds on, but it is unauthenticated. So the service will know that the request is unauthenticated. We don't reject the request right away. Then it goes through this serialization module that you can define, and then it's just routed through RabbitMQ to your microservice, the one you want. And then it responds, and then of course it's deserialized again, and the HTTP response is returned to the client. Pretty simple. So the way we run it is that we have an application that is what we actually call the thin layer that uses Broin as a dependency and configures it. It sets up everything that that it needs to run. So it has our custom authentication module. What it actually does for our case is it actually does an RPC call to a separate authentication service somewhere else. It contains all the configuration needed, and it has an application that also takes these Folsom metrics and forwards them to our Graphite. It has a little extra things like, of course, Docker setups and all kinds of internal things we use. But the way we deploy it is we have a Spotins group, which, depending on the time of day, is from 8 to 15 large AWS instances. It's probably a bit overkill compared to what actually it needs, but it makes us feel safe, that's for sure. And what it does is, like, majority of our API traffic goes through that. So everything except some very old systems that have been developed a long time ago, before this was a thing, they all go through Broen, and it comes up to like 100,000 requests every minute in like peak times. I have a little graph here that you can't really read unless you will download the slides maybe and zoom in, but you can see that this is a typical day at Issuu basically. You can see that it is at least there. It's at least 65,000 requests a minute, and it goes up to like 100. It's mostly most of our customer base is in the US. Most of our readership is in the US, so that's kind of where you can see like the time of day in the US looking at these graphs. So, but yeah, okay, I can talk about this a long time, but I think it's more interesting if I actually show you something and how it works. So here's Broen. I don't know if that's readable. I hope it is. Should I make it a little larger? There we go. So this is a serialization module. This is the one we ship with. It's also a sample. And what it does, it will serialize Broen requests over JSON and then forward them to RabbitMQ. So a serializer module needs to have a serialize and deserialize function, which I think it's quite obvious what they do. They do the mapping between the request format that we provide onto whatever you actually want to forward to your services. Then we also have the, I mean, you can see it's just a JSX encode, and it's just a simple encoding to JSON of whatever the request is. Then there is the authentication module, which is not very interesting. It's just a dummy. But the idea with the authentication module is that it receives the request, and it does whatever it needs to do, and then returns arbitrary data. And that data will be attached to the Broen request, and then your microservice can kind of read that data and check out, okay, this is authenticated or this is not authenticated. We also have you can also provide some CSRF protection and things like that in your authentication module if you wish, and then the error handling is a little different. All right, so I'm going to run this, but I want to show you the config first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this against RabbitMQ that I have running locally on my machine with just default password user, nothing interesting, on port 7083. That's basically it. So it's running now, but it's not very interesting because there's no services attached to it. So now what it really did now is it created the exchange it needs on RabbitMQ. So what it does is it creates this exchange called HTTP exchange, and then any client that actually wants to connect to Broen has to bind their queue to HTTP exchange. And HTTP exchange is a topic exchange. And the topic basically is, the routing key is the URL that you're looking for. So I have a sample client here. It's a very simple Elixir program that just makes 2 endpoints on Broen and replies with some requests. We're using this library called AMQP Director, which is an RPC client server library that we also made, and it's also open source. You can take a look at it. So I'm creating an endpoint here it's just an RPC server of the AMQP, and you can see it is going to call this handle function here anytime it receives an AMQP message, and then it binds to the exchange with this routing key, test service something. So I'm gonna scroll it up so people in the back can see. And then the handle function is very simple. The handle function will receive a JSON because that's what the serialization plugin does, and then it responds with just a very simple 200 and then a hello, which is just a plain text thing. So if I run this and go here, okay, now you won't believe me because it was here before I actually ran it. So if the service is not running, then we get this immediate message that the message is unroutable. It doesn't exist, right? So if I run it now, you will see, I'll make this one bigger as well. There's a 200 okay, and yeah, I got my hello. Wow, well, that's not very, maybe, interesting. So I also have a different endpoint here that actually does something more. Of course, I can just go back to this one and change the URL. If I don't like the something URL, I can just do this, call it something else instead, and restart the service. And now something is unavailable, right? But of course, the new URL is immediately there. Pretty simple. Okay. So this one is a bit more interesting. It subscribes with such routing key that it actually has a star at the end. So if you know AMQP, you know this is basically any term there, but only one. So it just takes any arbitrary term at the end of the URL. And the handle function is a bit more complicated. So the handle function this time, it actually takes a look at the request it received from the bridge, and it checks, oh, is it a GET request? Well, if it's a GET request, what we're going to do is we're going to take the routing key with, well, the URL, we're going to split it up, take the last bit, put it in a JSON, and then just respond. It's a little funny because it's a JSON in a JSON, but that's because the AMQP serialization protocol is also JSON. You can use anything you want, but the inner JSON is what's actually returned to the client. That's the actual response. So if I go now to methods and type whatever, then I get my funny JSON, and of course, whatever I type here, there's no other logic other than just return whatever was in the parameter, right? But that means you can parameterize your URLs quite easily with that. So if I don't like this, I can also change the status code. Let's say I don't actually want it to be running 200 okay. I don't want it to work very well. And of course, that is taken into account. We also have a post endpoint, so we can actually send some data to it and make it do things. So on post, it'll actually take a look at the client data it received, and then it'll just respond with a 201 and an empty JSON as content, because why not? To do this, I will just curl it. And yeah, I got the empty JSON as a response, and nobody in the back can see that. So you'll just have to trust me. But of course, it's not very interesting to receive empty JSON. So what we'll do is we'll just respond with basically the same thing that the client sent us. So if I do this, and run it again, there it is. I got my content back now. So yeah, the idea is that this is really open. You can do whatever you want. It's really up to you what this will respond. The bridge just forwards everything as it is. I can also, of course, use other HTTP methods. I can do a put, but that won't work because the case statement that I have in this service only handles get and post, right? So obviously this crashes, and eventually Broen, it did send a request. It found the root. The root exists, but the service is not replying. So at some point it'll just say that it timed out. That's also what happens if your server will fail your service will fail in some way. So just to sum up, we found it very nice because it provides us all the free scaling and everything that RabbitMQ really does. It does that for us for our HTTP endpoints. The single point authentication is very handy. And it's actually pretty nice when developing because you can just attach your development service to any environment you have. We have two environments. We have like a production, of course, and we have this replica of it. That's our test environment, and you can just attach to it and immediately start calling your service. there are some problems with it, and the problems are that, well, routing is limited to like topic exchange. That's what it does, and that's how you can route. Also, all these endpoints have to follow this route of /call, so you can't just make any arbitrary URL. And the biggest maybe problem is that there are no pre-existing frameworks for services like that. When you write your own web server, there's thousands of frameworks you can use to make your own Node.js, Phoenix, whatever you like. That doesn't exist for AMQP. But we're working on some kind of a generic solution that would just transform these AMQP into HTTP, sort of that the code you write sees it as HTTP, and then you could use all kinds of generic frameworks for this. And of course, yeah, well, RabbitMQ is a single point of failure, but if you have replication set up and a cluster, I don't think that's really a big problem. It's so yeah, the talk description also said that we're thinking about open sourcing it. That's also a lie. It is open source. You can go check it out right now. Play with it. There's a README that describes everything you need to know. But if something is unclear, then feel free to raise an issue or something like that, and we'll respond. So we very much like this technology, and it gives us great benefits. So I hope some of you are going to take a look at it and maybe benefit from it as well. And as a final note, I just want to mention that we are also hiring in Copenhagen, Berlin, and Palo Alto. So if you're looking for something new, then you can come talk to me or check out the website.